Welcome back, students. So we just had a great discussion about how drugs are interacting in the brain, everything ranging from depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, antipsychotics, and we even touched about how ibuprofen or Advil, even simple drugs, are working in the brain. And again, there's a lot of stuff that we didn't even get to cover in those 30 minutes, and we're not even going to be covered in this introductory class, but maybe we'll be able to touch on some of those other things later on.
Right.
So we are moving on. We are on to more implications. We are on the part of the course that is moving into the subjective, fun material. Not that learning neuroscience is not fun. Learning neuroscience, learning chemistry, learning biochemistry, learning molecular biology is hard work. It requires understanding. I encourage you guys to, when I say things that you don't remember when I talk about neurons or something like that, go back to the MIT OpenCourseWare material. Go back to the crash course material that Hank Green is doing. Go back to our earlier lectures in molecular biology to remember what we were talking about, because this course builds upon itself. Okay? So right now we are on week 8. Okay? We're looking at the implications of cognitive science, the implications of neuroscience, okay? Implications of psychology. We are on the more subjective material in the course. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at 4 different TED Talks. We're going to be examining them, of what the authors, of what the speakers of these TED Talks are saying, because a lot of them have written books too. And most of them are, again, based in neuroscience, based in brain science, and we're going to talk about the messages that they convey. So first we're going to look at one of the classically good TED Talks. It's really short, it's like 8 minutes long. It's by a neuroscientist by the name of V.S. Ramachandran. V.S. Ramachandran is a professor at UC San Diego, and he did a lot of work with phantom limbs. So soldiers in battle would actually lose, a part of their arm or something like that, and they would have phantom pain.
Huh.
And this is kind of a problem, okay? This is kind of a problem, and it's a problem because how do you treat pain that's non-existent? You say, the soldier says, "Doctor, I'm having pain in my arm," and it's like, your arm's not there. Okay? So this is called a concept called phantom pain. You can't just give someone a pain medication for this. You can't just give someone an opiate.
Well, why wouldn't that work?
Well, let's think about it. The receptors for the pain medication, for natural endorphins, are gone. I don't have an arm anymore. If I don't have an arm, there's not a place for those that pain medication to bind to, to act. So what he did was he invented this amazing strategy where he got a mirror in between a box, okay? And what he did is he made it look like he got, say my right arm was amputated, was blown off in battle.
Okay. I
put my left arm here, there's a mirror right here. I'm looking at the mirror, it's reflecting my left arm, and it looks like my right arm is now intact.
Okay.
And so it's stimulating the part of my brain saying, it's chill, your arm's still there. And again, now my pain goes away.
And that works?
And that works.
Even though the person is fully aware that
it totally works. It totally works.
It's almost like a parlor trick.
It's totally like a parlor trick. It totally works. So in this TED Talk, we're talking about a concept called mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons are very interesting because when I'm moving my hand right here, I'm moving my right hand, the part of your motor cortex, okay, the part of your brain that involves moving your hand is actually firing right now, just because I'm moving it. And the way they discovered this, there was some Italian scientists that had a pad of some serious electrodes on the head of a monkey. Okay, and what occurred was that the guy who was they were on their lunch break, and he was like moving his hand or something, and then all of a sudden on the screen came up the process for moving the right hand, and they're looking at the monkey, and the monkey's not doing anything.
That's crazy.
And that's how a lot of scientific discoveries are made.
By accident.
Just by accident. And they discovered that there are these neurons in our brain, especially in the motor cortex and in the touch sensory places, called mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons are actually reflecting the activity of something that you are viewing. It is an explanation for example, like say you're really into baseball.
Okay.
You're watching baseball occur on the television, you watch it your whole life. All of a sudden you're a little bit better at playing baseball, even though you've never played baseball before, because you've merely watched it, because your brain has already gone through the process of how to do it, because it's been reflecting the activity that you've seen.
Is that related to observational learning? Like,
I would say absolutely. It's absolutely related to observational learning. It is, the title of the TED Talk is The Neurons That Shaped Civilization. So let's talk about how these neurons shape civilization. Before evolution is working on a vertical fashion, okay? That, genes are passed down, that when animals have a new trait, they are passed down from generation to a generation. Now all of a sudden, we are cavemen, and you are an expert at using a stone tool. I don't have to, your offspring doesn't necessarily have to inherit that trait from you to learn the stone tool. I'm your friend, you're smarter than me, you know how to use the stone tool, all I have to do is just watch you. Okay, and now evolution is now working on a horizontal plane, rather than in a vertical manner.
Being able to spread information.
And I don't know if you've ever heard these two theories, but this is Darwinian evolution is on a vertical axis, which is the accepted way of evolution that we accept in the scientific community right now. V.S. Ramachandran says, hey, in a lot of ways, when our brains get big enough, okay, evolution is now working on a horizontal plane. It's working in a Lamarckian type of way. Okay? And Lamarck was another theorist who was basically wrong about how animals inherited their traits. He said that
is that similar to the giraffe who learns to stretch his neck long and therefore his children will have long necks?
Exactly.
Similar.
It says that there are changes that occur within the lifetime that are passed down to the offspring. And of course, now with modern science, we discover that, well, he was sort of correct.
Almost.
We sort of correct through things like epigenetics, which we're going to talk about later. There are changes during the lifetime which are passed down. But really, the most interesting thing that Dr. Ramachandran says in this TED Talk is he says that really there is a mirror neuron activity in the way we feel touch and the way we feel pain. So let's think about this for one sec, okay? So say that someone is touching me on my arm right here. Why do you not feel it in your arm? Because the same part of your brain is firing right now. Why are you not feeling it?
I wouldn't be able to.
That's the question. So V.S. Ramachandran says, well, that's obvious. That's because there's sensory neurons that are going from your arm back to your brain that are saying, it's chill. You're not being touched. You're not being touched. It's okay. You're not being touched. Now, if we inject a local anesthetic into you, like lidocaine, novocaine, those drugs block sodium channels. Okay. So they block signaling in the neuron, they prevent the neuron from firing an action potential, which we learned about. Now, all of a sudden, when I'm touching my arm, you're going to feel it in your arm. It's a crazy, according to V.S. Ramachandran.
Okay.
Now, this also works if we are to amputate your arm too.
That's what I was about to ask.
And this also works with pain too. Literally, if I inject you with the anesthetic, if I remove those sensory neurons from you and I are now connected. We have removed the barrier between you and I. Okay?
Yeah.
Between how this work.
Hold on a sec. Here's an interesting idea. Maybe that explains why we enjoy, for instance, sports so much? By watching other people do these activities?
So I think to really answer that question, it's how we develop a love for sports. So a lot of the time we will play a sport, we will do a sport, okay? Like say I really like surfing, And I also really love watching the Mavericks competition. That is a big wave surfing competition that happens in Monterey. The reason why I love it is because I can relate to it. Okay, is because my brain understands what it means to ride a wave. I know what it feels like to paddle for a wave, so when I'm watching them paddle for a wave, I know what that means. I know what it feels like to push the board up. I know what it feels like to stand up, and then most importantly, I know that exhilarating feeling, what it feels like to stand up and drop in on a huge wave. Of course, I don't quite understand what it means to surf a 50-foot wave.
Yeah,
okay, like they do, because maybe I've only dropped in on a 15-foot wave, which is still pretty big. But I can relate to it. I have an idea, and that's what helps me develop that love, because I have some background knowledge.
Here's a question: is that okay? Here's you you're able to I guess empathize with the person doing the reaction, right? So that's you have personal experience. That's what I'm saying. What if you were to take someone who has no experience but still loves to watch the Maverick competition?
Yeah.
Do you think they'd be able to get the same enjoyment based on what you're talking about, the whole phantom and relating that?
Probably not. Probably not right away, but if they watched enough, they would have.
Think so?
That, yeah. And I love how you just used the word empathize, because you haven't even watched this TED Talk, and Dr. Ramachandran's name for these neurons is what he calls empathy neurons, or Gandhi neurons. He calls them Gandhi neurons, or he calls them empathy neurons.
That's good.
So I'm really super stoked right now that you are taking this class with the other students, because I feel that you are able to foreshadow a lot of the information that's happening without even looking at it right away. So, moving on, there's going to be a few other TED Talks that we're going to look at. Okay. The next TED Talk is about a neuroscientist who had a stroke. Oh. She had a stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain.
Right.
Okay? And there is a debate in science about what the different hemispheres are doing. A lot of people say the left hemisphere is involved with analytical thinking. It's involved with math. Blah, 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 blah. A lot of people say that the right hemisphere is more artistic, is more involved with sort of creative activities. Okay? So she gives a very personal account of what happens when the left hemisphere of her brain gets knocked out. And of course it's subjective, it's from her point. But what I have you guys doing is you guys are going to watch the TED Talk, and then you are also going to read an article about how the left brain, right brain paradigm is not necessarily as clear as she says. But she does make a very convincing argument. But in this class we try and be objective, and we try and look at all sides to scientific theories.
Well, that's true, because speaking of which, I've heard of my own example where, I forget who, but the subject lost half their brain and was actually able to fully recover with literally half the hemisphere missing.
And do you remember how old this subject was?
Young.
Yeah.
7, 8, or 8, 9 maybe.
So
maybe even 4. I'm not
so what
sure.
we're learning,
Definitely.
okay, so what we're learning is that plasticity of the brain is throughout human development. Okay? Is when we're young, when we're in our teens, when we're in our middle age, when we're in our old age, the brain is always plastic. There are what are called critical periods. Okay, if you are to get a kitten, they do these experiments, and it's very sad. If you were to get a kitten and you are to sew the eyelid shut of the kitten, and then you open it back up a few weeks later, that cat will never see for the rest of its life outside of its eye. Science is barbaric in many ways, and this is what. And of course, there's a lot of other experiments that we've done are not as pretty. So the reason why. So the reason why we can make so many relations to the anecdote that you just said. The reason why that this person was able to essentially make almost a full recovery without half their brain is because the certain hemisphere took over for the other hemisphere. So let's say, I don't remember what hemisphere, maybe they lost their left hemisphere. That means the right hemisphere is taking over the activity of the left hemisphere. And especially if it was during childhood, there are more neurons in the brain. And you're going to be learning about development in the childhood brain. But I will say maybe one thing that wasn't mentioned is there's a process called pruning, where there are actually many more connections in a baby's brain, in a child's brain, than there are in an adult brain. Seriously. And so, even like when you watch a child playing the piano, you'll notice that first he or she is using their whole arm, and it's like, and it's not sounding like the greatest. Okay, it's not sounding beautiful. It's not sounding elegant. And then all of a sudden, you watch them start to play, and all of a sudden now they're just using their fingers. And then before long, they're being very precise in how they're using their fingers. And in fact, they're using a lot less neurons. They're using a lot less synapses to do that. Because think about it, they're using their whole arm. You know what I mean? There's a whole part of your brain that they were using. And for that activity, perhaps we could say that those synapses were being pruned down. Okay? That the remodeling, that they were actually losing synapses, and because they were losing synapses, it was acting in a more effective way for them to learn to play the piano. So we just got off on a huge discussion, but these are the types of discussions I want you guys to be having in your form conversation questions. Just like I'm having with Jack here, who's a student, because you guys are intelligent, you guys have knowledge of your own. Let this material inspire conversations. Let this material, I want you guys to go out and find your own material. Especially you're going to be doing that in your creative project that you're going to have for this class. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next TED Talk that we're going to look at. This is called Optogenetics, Controlling the Brain with Light. And I have it labeled as mind control.
Sounds fun.
So this is kind of a complicated concept in many ways that he doesn't explain, but because we had an introduction to biology, I think you guys can get this. So when we think of a virus, we think of bad. We think of this sort of thing that's not really alive, that's not alive, or it is alive. It's kind of on the threshold between being alive and not alive, and it's literally infecting you, and it's replicating all in your body. And the way a virus works is that it gets into your body, and it in many ways injects its own genetic material inside of your cell, and your cell's own machinery. Remember the central dogma of biology, where we're going from DNA to RNA to protein. DNA, RNA, protein. The virus is injecting its own DNA or its own RNA. That RNA codes for itself. Right. Then your body is making copies of the virus out of your body's own material.
Right, so they hijack your factories.
Exactly. They hijack your factories. So now, what if we can engineer a virus to inject the type of material that we want? So in this example, why don't we make our virus inject the genetic material to code for a light-sensitive protein that's going to express itself on the surface of specific neurons that we want to control. Whoa, that was a little complicated.
A little bit.
Let's take that back one more step, okay? One more step. So we've engineered a virus. That virus codes for a protein, and you remember that proteins are made out of amino acids, okay? This protein is sensitive to light. And what happens is when light shines on that protein, that allows, in many ways, more sodium ions to come inside the cell. And that increases the likelihood that that neuron is going to fire an action potential, what you learned before, because we have now raised the positive potential charge within inside the neuron. So, all of a sudden, these neurons that were not sensitive to light are now sensitive to light. And what this guy has done, okay, he has made these neurons expressed in flies. He has made these light-sensitive neurons expressed in certain flies, okay, and then shines light on them, and he can actually control what they're doing. So that's pretty creepy, but we can again think of the implications.
Therapeutic uses.
Therapeutic uses, or potentially very dangerous uses.
Yes, I think of several.
Imagine, I mean, if for those of you who've read Harry Potter, which I think some of you have, this is kind of like the Imperius Curse. The Imperius Curse is a spell that literally you are able to control someone else's actions. You are able to control someone else's behavior. This is the first step of technology doing that. And that's pretty creepy. But this is something that scientists are studying right now, and it's clearly not, we're not going to avoid it as a topic in our class, because it's very important for the implications for what this could have on human society.
Exactly, it could go either way, really.
It could go either way. I mean, what if someone was having a schizophrenic breakdown and we could
help them get to the hospital.
We could help them get to the hospital, or we could help them calm down.
Or that.
Just by having these light-sensitive proteins expressed in their brain and being like, here's my flashlight, calm down. Okay. So.
Or even as simple as guide dogs. Someone's dog is acting up and you need to help them get them.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on, I feel like there's just so much amazing material in these TED Talks. Okay, the last talk is one of my favorite talks, and in many ways, a very important talk. It's by Sebastian Sung, and I believe Dr. Sung is a professor at MIT, and the talk is called I Am My Connectome. And you might say, whoa, well, I've heard of the genome. The genome is my genetic material, but what is the connectome? Well, the connectome is the mapping of every synapse in your brain. It's the mapping of literally every neural connection inside of your brain. So, and the beautiful thing is, you and I have completely different connectomes. I believe that we have in excess of 99% the same genetic material,
right.
You and I, because we are both Homo sapiens, and even with other mammals, we have a very similar genetic makeup. But in terms of the way in which our neurons are connected in the brain is very different.
Mm.
Okay? So what this guy is doing at MIT is he's trying to map the human connectome. And he's trying to say that this behavior is linked to this connection in the brain. And you know what? He's not even close.
Yeah, how would you be able to do that considering just the variability from person to person?
Right now, we're unable to do that in a human being. He's mapped the connectome of very, very simple organisms. Even like, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly in his TED Talk, but they've mapped the connectome. A neuroscientist by the name of Eric Kandel mapped the connectome of a sea slug. And he was able to notice that when he cut a neuron in a certain place, that affected the sea slug's ability to perform some certain task, like respond to light or have some sort of response. So he was able to say that, you know, there's whatever, several hundred, several thousand neurons in this brain. On that simple level, we were able to map those, and we were able to see what the different connections are actually mapping to in terms of the behavior of this slug. But again, let's think of the implications to mapping out the entire brain, to understanding what every neuron is doing, what the place of every neuron is doing in the brain. So, you know, a theme of this class that I want to even just bring up now, that how this class is going to wrap up, is we really want to think about the relationships between complex systems. We want to think about not necessarily that neuron A and neuron B exist, but we want to think about the relationship neuron A has to neuron B. And we want to think about the way in which neuron A is connected to neuron B, and how neuron C interacts with A and B, and how neuron D does not connect to those neurons. Okay, that's an example. It doesn't matter necessarily the components of the system.
Right, because we're greater than the sum of our parts.
Beautiful.
So it's
beautiful.
You gotta look at the sum rather than the parts.
Beautiful.
You know, as that saying.
It matters. It matters the relationships between the components. Gregory Bateson, a famous anthropologist, cyberneticist, and ecologist, once said, "Think not of the 5 digits of your hand, think of the 4 relationships between those fingers." Okay? It's an abstract saying, but again, we can start to apply this. Let's not think of the individual people in the system. Let's think about the relationships that those people have to one another.
Right.
Right. So let's end it right there. Okay. But let's start to get these ideas in our brain about really the hypercomplexity of the brain, the hypercomplexity of society, and how these systems require us to think about the complex relationships in between the components of the system.